In the bitter cold of a Wyoming winter, a widow with nothing left to her name made a choice that would change her life forever. Kate Brennan, starving and struggling to survive, encountered a shivering child lost in the snow. With barely enough food for herself, she gave him her last meal, not knowing he was the son of the most powerful man in the territory. What she did next, in a moment of pure compassion, was quietly observed by someone hidden in the shadows. And when the cruel store owner who had been tormenting her finally pushed her too far, that observer would step forward with an offer that seemed impossible. This is a story about kindness when it costs everything, about being seen when you feel invisible, and about how one act of humanity can echo across an entire community. What happens next will remind you that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. This is Kate Brennan's story. The wooden crate slipped from Kate Brennan's frozen fingers and crashed onto the snow-packed floor of Hawthorne's general store, scattering dried beans across the planks like scattered hope. The sound cut through the low murmur of afternoon customers, miners picking up tobacco, ranch wives examining fabric, a telegraph operator counting coins for coffee. For a moment, everything stopped. Kate dropped to her knees, her worn brown skirt soaking up the slush that had been tracked in all morning. Her fingers, red and cracked from the cold, scrambled to gather the beans before they rolled into the cracks between the boards. Her shawl, thin and frayed at the edges, slipped from her shoulders. "Third time this month, Mrs. Brennan," came the sharp voice of Silas Hawthorne from behind the counter. He was a thick-set man in his 50s, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that always seemed to be calculating profit. "That's coming out of your wages." Kate didn't look up. She kept her head down, sweeping beans into her apron with shaking hands. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hawthorne. It won't happen again." "It better not," he said loud enough for the nearest customers to hear. A woman by the fabric table glanced over, then quickly looked away. "You're lucky I even hired you. Most men wouldn't take on a woman with no husband and no family." Kate bit the inside of her cheek and nodded once. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not with the rent on her cabin due in 3 days. Not with the last of her firewood running out and winter showing no signs of mercy. At 32, Kate Brennan had never imagined this would be her life. 6 years ago, she'd been Catherine Hayes, a promising midwife and nurse working alongside Dr. Henry Morrison in Cheyenne. She had steady hands, a sharp mind, and a gift for calming even the most frightened mothers during labor. Dr. Morrison used to say she had a healer's heart, the kind you couldn't teach. Then she met Eliza Brennan, a kind, soft-spoken carpenter with gentle eyes and a laugh that made her feel safe. They married in the spring, moved to Silver Ridge to start fresh, and for 2 years, life had been good, until the mine collapse. Eliza had been helping reinforce the supports at the Bennett mine when the ceiling gave way. 12 men went in that morning. Only 4 came out. Eliza wasn't one of them. The town had offered their condolences. A few meals were dropped off. Then the sympathy faded, and Kate was left alone with a stack of medical books she could no longer afford to use, a cabin she could barely heat, and a reputation as the unfortunate widow no one quite knew what to do with. She'd tried to return to her work as a midwife, but Silver Ridge already had Mrs. Colleen Drake, the town's established midwife for over 20 years, and there wasn't enough work for 2. Kate had offered to assist for free, just to keep her skills sharp, but Mrs. Drake had politely declined. So she took what she could get, washing linens at the boarding house, mending clothes, and now stocking shelves at Hawthorne's for $2 a week, barely enough to cover rent, let alone food. Kate stood slowly, brushing the dust from her skirt. Her boots, the same ones Eliza had resoled for her 3 winters ago, were splitting at the seams. She'd stuffed them with newspaper to keep the snow out, but it only worked for so long. "Get back to the stockroom," Hawthorne said, already turning to help a customer. "And don't let me catch you daydreaming again." Kate walked toward the back of the store, shoulders tight, jaw set. She passed a small barrel of apples near the door, bright red, perfect. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. A half loaf of stale bread and some weak tea. But she didn't take one. She never took one. Even when she was starving, Kate Brennan didn't steal. And she had no idea that by the end of the day, that choice, among others, would be noticed by someone watching from the shadows. The snow had started falling again by the time Kate's shift ended. Fat, heavy flakes drifted down from a sky the color of old iron, blanketing Silver Ridge in a fresh layer of white that made everything look cleaner than it actually was. Kate pulled her shawl tighter and stepped out onto the wooden boardwalk, her breath misting in the frigid air. The temperature had dropped sharply since morning. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her fingers refused to bend properly, even inside her thin gloves. The walk home was only half a mile, but in this cold it felt like 10. She passed the saloon, where warm light and rough laughter spilled out into the street. Past the blacksmith shop, now closed for the evening, its forge dark and cold. Past the church, with its white steeple cutting into the gray sky like a promise nobody could quite keep. Her cabin sat at the far edge of town, tucked against the tree line where the pines grew thick and the wind cut sharp. It was small, one room, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, and a table Eliza had built with his own hands. The roof leaked when it rained, and the door didn't quite seal against the drafts, but it was hers, at least for 3 more days. Kate was halfway down the snow-covered path when she heard it. A sound, soft, muffled. She stopped, listening. There it was again, a quiet whimper, almost lost beneath the whisper of falling snow. She turned, scanning the tree line. At first, she saw nothing. Then, near the base of a large pine about 20 yards off the path, she spotted a small figure, huddled against the trunk, a child. Kate's heart lurched. She hurried toward him, boots crunching through the snow. He was a boy, no more than 9 or 10, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, and a face pale as candle wax. His coat was fine, too fine for Silver Ridge, made of thick wool with brass buttons, but it hung open, and his scarf was missing. His lips had a faint blue tinge. "Hey," Kate said gently, kneeling in front of him. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered open. They were brown, wide, and glassy with cold. I got lost," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I was with my father. We stopped in town. I wanted to see the snow, and then I couldn't find him." Kate's hands moved on instinct. She pressed her palm to his forehead, too cold. She checked his fingers, stiff, barely responsive. Early stages of frostbite, maybe hypothermia. "What's your name, Bush?" she asked, already unbuttoning her shawl. Samuel, he stammered, "but everyone calls me Sam." "All right, Sam. I'm Kate, and I'm going to help you. But we need to get you warm. Can you stand?" He nodded weakly. Kate wrapped her shawl around his shoulders and helped him to his feet. He swayed, unsteady, and she caught him, looping his arm over her shoulder. "My cabin's just ahead," she said. "We'll get you inside, get you warm, and then we'll find your father. Okay?" "Okay," Sam whispered. She half carried him down the path, her own body already shivering without the shawl. By the time they reached her cabin, her teeth were chattering, but she didn't stop. She shouldered the door open, guided Sam to the single chair near the fireplace, and immediately set to work building a fire. Her hands shook as she struck the flint. Once, twice. On the third try, the kindling caught, and a small flame began to grow. She turned back to Sam, who sat slumped in the chair, eyes half closed. "Stay with me, Sam," she said firmly, rubbing his hands between hers. "You're going to be fine." On the table behind her sat her supper, a small pot of watery stew she'd been saving, made from bone broth, 2 carrots, and a handful of barley. It was supposed to last her 3 days. She looked at Sam, then at the pot. She didn't hesitate. Kate ladled the stew into her only bowl, pulled the chair closer to the fire, and placed the warm bowl in Sam's trembling hands. "Eat," she said softly. "All of it." And from the shadow of the pines outside, hidden just beyond the frosted window, a tall figure in a dark coat watched in silence. Governor James Caldwell stood motionless in the growing darkness, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Snow gathered on the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his heavy wool overcoat, but he didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the small cabin, on the warm glow of firelight visible through the gap in the curtains. He had been searching for over an hour. The trip to Silver Ridge had been routine, a brief stop to meet with the Territorial Mining Commissioner, inspect the new telegraph station, and return to Cheyenne before nightfall. He'd brought Sam along, thinking the boy needed to see how government worked, how men conducted business. But Sam had wandered off while James was inside the assayer's office. One moment he was there, the next he'd vanished into the snow-covered street like smoke. James had torn through town, demanding answers, rallying every able man to search. And then he'd seen her, a woman in a threadbare shawl, leading his son toward the edge of town, with the kind of careful urgency that spoke of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He'd followed at a distance, instinct telling him to wait, to watch. And now he understood why. Through the window, he could see the woman kneeling beside Sam, pressing a bowl into his hands. She was speaking to him. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the gentleness in her posture, the way she tucked a blanket around his shoulders with practiced efficiency. Sam was eating. Slowly, but he was eating. James's jaw tightened. His son was alive, safe. And this stranger had done what a dozen men with torches and rifles had failed to do. She'd found him. He should go in, announce himself, reclaim his son. But something held him back. He wanted to see what happened next. Inside the cabin, Kate watched Sam finish the last spoonful of stew. Color was returning to his cheeks, and his hands had stopped shaking. She'd wrapped him in both of her blankets and pulled the chair so close to the fire he was nearly touching the hearth. "Better?" she asked. Sam nodded, clutching the empty bowl in his lap. "Thank you, ma'am. I thought I was going to freeze." "You almost did," Kate said honestly, "but you're safe now." "Do you remember where you were staying? A hotel, a boarding house?" "The Silver Ridge Hotel," Sam said. "My father had business at the assayer's office. He told me to wait, but I wanted to see the general store, and then I saw the pine trees, and I got turned around." Kate nodded. The Silver Ridge Hotel was on the far side of town, expensive, reserved for territorial officials and wealthy investors. This boy's father wasn't a miner or a ranch hand. He was someone important. "I'll take you back," she said, even though the thought of walking another mile in the cold made her bones ache. "Your father must be worried sick." "He doesn't worry," Sam said quietly, staring into the fire. "He's always busy, always working. I don't think he even noticed I was gone until someone told him." Kate's chest tightened. She recognized that tone, the loneliness beneath it. "I'm sure that's not true," she said gently. "Sometimes people show love in different ways, especially when they're carrying a lot of responsibility." Sam looked up at her. "Are you a mother?" The question hit harder than it should have. "No," Kate said softly, "but I used to help bring babies into the world. I was a midwife. I took care of people." "Why'd you stop?" Kate hesitated. Life got complicated. Before Sam could ask more, the door swung open. A gust of wind and snow burst into the cabin, and with it came a voice, sharp, cold, and familiar. "Well, well, Mrs. Brennan." Kate turned. Silas Hawthorne stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men from town, both members of the volunteer search party. His face was red from the cold, but his eyes gleamed with something else: suspicion, opportunity. Heard there was a lost boy, Hawthorne said, stepping inside without invitation. Governor's son, no less. Funny how he ended up here, in your cabin, alone. Kate stood slowly, placing herself between Hawthorne and Sam. He was freezing. I brought him inside to warm up. I was just about to what? Hawthorne interrupted, his voice loud, pointed. Keep him here? Maybe ask for a reward? That's not... Governor's offering $50 to whoever finds the boy, Hawthorne continued, his gaze sliding toward Sam. But taking him without telling anyone? That looks awfully suspicious, Mrs. Brennan, especially for someone as desperate as you. Kate's hands clenched at her sides. I was helping him. Sure you were, Hawthorne said, smirking now. He turned to the men behind him. Take the boy back to his father. I'll handle this. And outside, still hidden in the shadows, Governor James Caldwell's expression hardened. He'd seen enough. The walk back through town felt like a death march. Hawthorne hadn't arrested Kate. He didn't have the authority, but he'd made sure everyone saw him escort her down Main Street like a criminal. Word spread faster than wildfire in a town like Silver Ridge. By the time they reached the general store, faces were already pressed against windows, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Did you hear? The widow had the governor's boy. Alone in her cabin, they said. Always knew there was something off about her. Kate kept her eyes forward, jaw tight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Sam had tried to speak up, tried to tell them she'd helped him, but Hawthorne had cut him off, insisting the boy was confused from the cold. When they reached the hotel, Hawthorne turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Don't bother coming in tomorrow, he said. I can't have someone working for me who the whole town's talking about. Bad for business. Kate's stomach dropped. Mr. Hawthorne, please, I need this job. Should have thought of that before you decided to play hero, he said, tipping his hat mockingly. Good evening, Mrs. Brennan. He disappeared into the hotel, leaving her standing in the snow. Kate stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping through her boots, through her skin, into her very marrow. Then she turned and walked home. The cabin was dark when she returned. The fire had burned down to embers. She didn't bother rekindling it. There wasn't enough wood left, and she'd need to save what little she had. Kate lit a single candle and sank into the chair Sam had sat in just hours before. The empty bowl still rested on the table, a ghost of the meal she'd given away, her last meal. She opened the small wooden box where she kept her money. $3.40. Rent was $5, due in 2 days. She'd be evicted by week's end. Kate closed the box and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back the wave of despair threatening to drown her. She'd survived Eliza's death. She'd survived the loss of her profession, her dignity, her future. But this felt like the final blow. A soft knock at the door startled her. She stood slowly, wary. It was past 9 o'clock. No one came calling this late unless it was trouble. She opened the door to find Mrs. Ruth Pemberton standing on her porch, a basket covered with a cloth in her hands. Ruth was an older woman, mid-60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen too much hardship to judge anyone else's. Heard what happened, Ruth said simply. Brought you some bread and cheese. It's not much, but... Ruth, I can't, Kate said, her voice cracking. I can't keep taking from people. You're not taking, Ruth said firmly, pushing the basket into Kate's hands. You're receiving. There's a difference. Now let me in before we both freeze. Kate stepped aside, and Ruth entered, her eyes sweeping over the cold cabin, the dwindling candle, the empty fireplace. Lord have mercy, Ruth muttered. She began moving around the cabin with the efficiency of someone who'd raised 6 children through 2 harsh winters. Within minutes, she'd coaxed the fire back to life using wood from her own basket and set a kettle of water to boil. Ruth, you don't have to... Hush, Ruth said. I know what people are saying. And I know it's hogwash. You saved that boy's life tonight, Kate. Anyone with eyes could see it. Kate sank back into the chair, the warmth of the fire bringing tears she'd been holding back all evening. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "Hawthorne fired me. I can't pay rent. I'm going to lose everything." Ruth was quiet for a moment, then reached into her apron and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came for you," she said. "Telegraph office. Boy dropped it off at my place by mistake. Your cabin's hard to find in the dark." Kate took the paper with trembling hands and unfolded it. It was from Dr. Henry Morrison in Cheyenne. "Kate, new territorial health initiative. Need experienced midwife/nurse. Position available. Housing included. Wire response immediately. Morrison." Kate stared at the words, reading them twice, 3 times. It was dated 4 days ago. The telegraph office closed at 5. She'd missed it. The paper slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor. Ruth picked it up, read it, and looked at Kate with something between hope and heartbreak. "You'll wire him first thing in the morning," Ruth said firmly. But Kate just shook her head, staring into the fire. "It's too late," she whispered. "It's already too late." Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the darkness, a decision was being made. Kate woke to the sound of knocking, not the soft, apologetic tap of a neighbor, but a firm, official knock that made her sit upright in bed, heart pounding. The gray light filtering through the window told her it was barely past dawn. 6 o'clock, maybe earlier. She'd barely slept. The fire had died hours ago, and she'd spent the night curled beneath a single thin blanket, listening to the wind rattle the loose boards of her cabin and thinking about all the ways her life had unraveled. The knocking came again, louder this time. Kate rose stiffly, her joints aching from the cold, and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. She moved to the door and opened it a crack. A man stood on her porch, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp black suit with a silver watch chain glinting at his vest. His face was clean-shaven, his expression neutral, but not unkind. Behind him, a polished black carriage waited in the snow, its horses stamping impatiently, their breath steaming in the frigid air. "Mrs. Catherine Brennan?" the man asked. Kate nodded slowly, confused. "Yes? My name is Thomas Gray. I'm an aide to Governor James Caldwell." He reached into his coat and withdrew a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. "The governor requests your presence at his residence this morning. The carriage will take you." Kate stared at the envelope, then at the man, then at the carriage. I don't understand," she said. "Why does the governor want to see me?" "That will be explained when you arrive," Gray said. "The governor asked me to assure you that you are not in any trouble. This is an invitation, not a summons." However, he paused, glancing at the envelope. "He did ask me to tell you that Samuel insists you come." Those were his exact words. Kate's breath caught. "Sam." "I'll need a few minutes," she said quietly. "Of course." "The carriage will wait. We depart in 15 minutes." Gray tipped his hat and returned to the carriage, standing beside it like a sentry. Kate closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. The governor wanted to see her. The same governor whose son she'd helped. The same governor who, if Hawthorne had his way, probably thought she was some desperate woman trying to exploit a lost child. She should refuse. She should stay here, pack her things, prepare for the inevitable eviction. But Sam had asked for her. That changed everything. Kate moved quickly. She washed her face with the icy water from the basin, combed her hair, and pinned it into a neat bun. She put on her only good dress, a simple gray wool that had once been Eliza's mother's, carefully altered to fit her frame. It was outdated, the sleeves a bit too long, but it was clean and mended. She pulled on her splitting boots, stuffed with fresh newspaper, and wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Before leaving, she paused at the small table and picked up the telegraph from Dr. Morrison. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket, just in case. The carriage ride was unlike anything Kate had experienced in years. The seats were upholstered in dark leather, lined with fur throws to keep out the cold. A small brass lantern swung gently from a hook, casting warm light across the interior. Thomas Gray sat across from her, silent and professional, his hands folded in his lap. Kate looked out the window as Silver Ridge disappeared behind them. They weren't heading toward the hotel. They were heading north, toward the territorial road that led to Cheyenne. "Where are we going?" she asked. Yeah, say going, she asked. "The governor is staying at the Whitman estate," Gray replied, "about 8 miles north of town. It's a private residence often used for territorial business." Kate nodded, her stomach twisting with nerves. The carriage rolled through snow-covered hills, past frozen creeks and clusters of pine trees heavy with frost. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of pale gold and soft pink. After nearly an hour, the carriage turned onto a long, tree-lined drive. At the end of it stood a large 2-story house built from stone and timber, with wide windows and a wraparound porch. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. Lanterns glowed warmly in the windows. It was grand, but not ostentatious. Powerful, but not cold. The carriage stopped in front of the main entrance. Gray stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Kate down. The front door opened before they reached it, and there, standing in the doorway with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and a shy smile on his face, was Sam. "You came," he said, relief flooding his voice. Kate's throat tightened. "Of course I did." Behind Sam, a tall figure stepped into view. Governor James Caldwell. His eyes met hers, steady, measuring, but not unkind. "Mrs. Brennan," he said quietly, "thank you for coming. We have much to discuss." Governor James Caldwell was not what Kate expected. She'd imagined someone cold, austere, the kind of man who governed from behind a desk, with little regard for the people his decisions affected. But the man standing before her had tired eyes, silver threading through his dark hair, and the kind of quiet intensity that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. "Please come in," he said, stepping aside. Kate followed him into a spacious sitting room, warmed by a large stone fireplace. The furniture was comfortable but not extravagant. Leather chairs, a wooden table, bookshelves lined with legal texts and territorial reports. Sam sat near the fire, a mug of hot chocolate in his hands, watching her with that same shy smile. "Sam, why don't you finish your breakfast in the other room?" the governor said gently. "I need to speak with Mrs. Brennan privately." Sam hesitated, then looked at Kate. "You're not leaving, are you?" "Not yet," Kate said softly. Satisfied, Sam nodded and disappeared through a side door, taking his mug with him. The governor gestured to one of the chairs. "Please, sit." Kate sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She felt the weight of his gaze, studying her the way a judge might study evidence. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, settling into the chair across from her, "and an explanation." Kate said nothing, waiting. "I was there," he continued, "last night, outside your cabin. I followed you when you took Sam, not because I thought you were a threat, but because I needed to see what kind of person you were." Kate's eyes widened slightly. "You were watching?" "I was," he admitted. "I saw you wrap him in your shawl. Carry him when he couldn't walk, build a fire with hands that were shaking from cold, and then—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "I saw you give him your only meal." Kate looked down, embarrassed. "He was a child. He needed it more than I did." "You were starving," the governor said quietly. "Thomas made inquiries this morning. I know about your situation, Mrs. Brennan. I know you lost your husband in the mine collapse. I know you've been working for pennies at Hawthorne's store. I know your rent is overdue, and you have no food in your cabin." Kate's cheeks flushed. "With all due respect, Governor, I don't need pity." "This isn't pity," he said firmly. "This is recognition." He stood and walked to a desk near the window, retrieving a leather folder. He returned and placed it on the table between them. "After I saw what you did for Sam, I stayed in town. I asked questions. I learned who you were, not just the widow everyone whispers about, but who you really are. Catherine Hayes, top of your class at the nursing academy in Cheyenne, trained under Dr. Henry Morrison, one of the most skilled midwives in the territory before you gave it all up to care for your dying husband. Kate's throat tightened. She hadn't heard her maiden name spoken aloud in years. The governor opened the folder. Inside were documents, personnel records, testimonials, even a letter from Dr. Morrison written years ago, recommending her for advanced training. I also learned what Silas Hawthorne did last night, the governor continued, his voice hardening. How he humiliated you in front of the entire town. How he fired you for saving my son's life. He was protecting his business, Kate said quietly, though the words tasted bitter. He was protecting his ego, the governor corrected, and as of this morning, he no longer owns that business. Kate's head snapped up. What? Hawthorne's store operates on a territorial trade license, the governor explained. Licenses I have the authority to review and revoke. An audit this morning revealed he's been skimming from employee wages for months, including yours. His license has been suspended pending investigation. Kate stared at him, stunned. I'm not telling you this for revenge, the governor said. I'm telling you because what happened to you was wrong. And because I want you to understand that what I'm about to offer you isn't charity. It's an opportunity you've already earned. He slid a second document across the table. Kate picked it up with trembling hands. It was an official appointment letter, Territorial Health Initiative, position, lead nurse and midwife coordinator, salary, $60 per month, housing provided, start date, immediate. Kate read it twice, her vision blurring. Dr. Morrison has been trying to reach you, the governor said. He's been advocating for this program for months, bringing medical care to mining camps, frontier towns, and underserved communities. He requested you specifically. Kate's hands shook. I got his telegram, but it was too late, I thought. It's not too late, the governor said. Morrison's waiting for your answer, but before you give it. He paused, his expression softening. There's someone else who wants to speak with you. The side door opened, and Sam stepped back into the room. He walked straight to Kate and held out a piece of paper, a drawing. It showed 3 figures, a small boy, a tall man, and a woman with a shawl, standing in front of a cabin. Above them, in careful letters, Sam had written, "She saw me when I was lost." Kate's eyes filled with tears. My father says you're leaving, Sam said quietly, but I wanted to say thank you. And he hesitated. I hope wherever you go, you help other people like you helped me. Kate knelt down so she was eye level with him, just like she had the night before. You're a brave boy, Sam, she said softly, and I'll never forget you. She stood, wiping her eyes, and looked at the governor. I accept, she said, her voice steady now. I accept the position. Governor Caldwell smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. Then welcome back, Nurse Brennan, racing with a mixture of disbelief and hope. But as the initial shock began to fade, reality crept back in, cold and insistent. Governor Caldwell, she said slowly, carefully, I'm grateful, truly, but I need to understand something. The governor tilted his head slightly, waiting. Kate set the letter down on the table and met his eyes directly. Why me? You have the power to hire anyone. Trained nurses from back east, doctors from established practices. Why would you go to this trouble for someone you just met? Because of what I saw last night, he replied simply. That's not enough, Kate said, her voice firmer now. I won't be someone's charitable project. I won't be the token gesture that makes a powerful man feel good about himself, and I won't be hired because your son likes me. A flicker of surprise crossed the governor's face, followed by something that looked like respect. Go on, he said. Kate took a breath. If this position is real, if it's not just about repaying a debt or easing your conscience, then I need to know what you actually expect from me. Because I'm not going to be anyone's personal nurse. Not yours, not Sam's. If I do this, I do it for the people who need it most. The miners' wives giving birth in freezing tents. The children in camps with no access to clean water. The families who can't afford a doctor. The governor studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You're right to question me," he said, "and you're right to demand clarity." He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered hills. "The truth is, Mrs. Brennan, I didn't create this position for you. It's been authorized for 3 months. Dr. Morrison has interviewed 6 candidates. None of them lasted more than 2 weeks." Kate frowned. "Why not?" "Because frontier medicine isn't glamorous," the governor said. "It's cold camps and long rides and patients who can't pay. The nurses we hired wanted the title and the salary, but they didn't want the work. They certainly didn't want to live in the communities they were supposed to serve." He turned back to face her. "Dr. Morrison told me he needed someone who understood what it meant to have nothing. Someone who wouldn't look down on the people they were helping. Someone who'd already proven they'd give their last meal to a stranger." He paused. "That's not charity, Mrs. Brennan. That's qualification." Kate's hands unclenched slightly. "As for Sam," the governor continued, his voice softening, "you're right that he likes you. But that's not why you're here. You're here because in 1 hour you did what a year of expensive tutors and specialists couldn't do. You made him feel seen. Not as the governor's son, not as the boy in the wheelchair after the accident, just as Sam." Kate glanced toward the door where Sam had disappeared, remembering the way he'd looked at her, not with need, but with trust. "The accident," she said quietly. "What happened?" The governor's jaw tightened. "Riding accident 8 months ago. He fell, fractured his arm, and injured his spine. The doctors said he'd walk again with time and therapy, but he stopped trying, stopped talking, stopped drawing. He just gave up." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't know how to reach him anymore." Kate understood then. This wasn't about gratitude. It was about a father who'd watched his son disappear into silence and had finally seen a flicker of light. "I can't promise to fix him," Kate said carefully. "That's not my role." "I'm not asking you to," the governor replied. "I'm asking you to do what you've already been doing, see people. Care for them, use the skills you've spent years developing." Kate picked up the letter again, reading it more carefully this time. The salary was fair, the housing provision was outlined clearly, a small cottage in Cheyenne, near Dr. Morrison's practice, with space for her mother if needed. Her mother. "I have one condition," Kate said. "Name it." "My mother-in-law still lives in Silver Ridge. She's elderly, alone. If I take this position, I need to know she'll be taken care of. Not by me directly, but by someone trustworthy. Mrs. Ruth Pemberton has been kind to both of us. If there's any way to ensure she's compensated for helping, consider it done," the governor said. "Mrs. Pemberton will receive a monthly stipend as a territorial care provider. It's an existing program, underutilized. She'll be helping others in need as well." Kate felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She looked down at the letter one more time, then at the governor. "I have one more question," she said. "Ask it." "If I fail, if I'm not what Dr. Morrison needs, or if the work is too much, will you let me go with dignity, no strings attached?" The governor extended his hand. "You have my word." Kate looked at his outstretched hand. Then slowly she reached out and shook it. "Then I accept, Governor Caldwell. Not because you offered it, but because it's the work I was meant to do." A genuine smile crossed his face. "Welcome to the Territorial Health Initiative, Nurse Brennan." From the doorway, Sam's voice rang out, bright and clear. "Does this mean you're staying?" Kate turned and smiled. "Not staying, but not disappearing either. I'll be in Cheyenne, and I expect you to write me letters about Crash the Cat's adventures." Sam grinned, a full, unguarded grin, that made him look like the child he was supposed to be. And for the first time in years, Kate felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. 18 months later, the autumn sun hung low over Cheyenne, casting golden light across the newly constructed building at the corner of Ferguson Street and 17th Avenue. The sign above the entrance, carved from polished pine and painted in crisp lettering, read, "Silver Ridge Territorial Health Clinic, serving all communities." Kate Brennan stood on the front steps, clipboard in hand, watching as the last of the supply wagons was unloaded. Crates of bandages, medicines, surgical tools, and educational materials were carried inside by a team of volunteers, miners, ranch hands, and townspeople who'd come to help prepare for tomorrow's grand opening. She was dressed professionally now, a crisp white blouse, dark skirt, and a wool jacket tailored to fit. Her hair was pinned neatly beneath a practical hat, and around her neck hung a silver stethoscope, a gift from Dr. Morrison on her first day back. But her boots were still worn. She'd kept them, a reminder. "Nurse Brennan," called a young woman from inside. "We've got the exam room set up, but we're short on clean linens for the birthing suite." "Check the second wagon," Kate called back. "Mrs. Pemberton donated 24 sheets this morning." Ruth Pemberton had become more than a friend over the past year. She'd become a partner, coordinating care efforts across Silver Ridge, training other women to assist with births and basic medical needs, and serving as the bridge between the clinic and the communities that needed it most. The territorial stipend had given Ruth financial stability, but more than that, it had given her purpose. She was thriving, so was Kate. The first few months had been grueling. She'd traveled to remote mining camps on horseback, delivered babies in freezing tents, treated frostbite and infections and injuries with whatever supplies she could carry. There were nights she'd slept on dirt floors and mornings she'd woken to find her water basin frozen solid. But she'd also delivered 37 healthy babies, saved 4 men from dying of infection, taught 24 women how to recognize the early signs of illness in their children. And slowly, the territorial health program had grown. Dr. Morrison had secured additional funding. 2 more nurses had been hired, women Kate had trained herself. And now, they had this, a permanent clinic, centrally located, designed to serve not just Cheyenne, but every surrounding community within a 50-mile radius. Kate heard the sound of wheels on gravel and looked up. A black carriage was approaching, polished and familiar. Her heart lifted. The carriage stopped in front of the clinic, and Thomas Gray stepped out first, offering his hand. From inside, Governor James Caldwell emerged, dressed in his formal coat and hat. And behind him, gripping a pair of polished wooden crutches, came Sam. He was taller now, almost gangly, the way boys get when they're starting to stretch toward adolescence. His hair was neatly combed, his face bright with excitement, and he was walking. Not perfectly, not without effort, but he was walking. Kate descended the steps quickly, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Sam Caldwell," she said, stopping in front of him. "Look at you." Sam grinned, clearly proud. "I've been practicing." "Dr. Morrison said I might not need these in another year." "You've been working hard," Kate said. "I can see it." The governor stepped forward, his expression warm. "We couldn't miss the opening," Sam insisted. "I made you something," Sam said, reaching into his coat. He pulled out a rolled piece of paper tied with string. Kate untied it carefully and unrolled it. It was a drawing, detailed, colored, beautifully rendered. It showed the clinic, surrounded by people, mothers holding babies, children playing, nurses moving between patients. And in the center, standing on the front steps, was a woman in a white coat. At the bottom, in Sam's careful handwriting, "For Nurse Kate, who sees people when they're lost." Kate's throat tightened. She looked up at Sam, her eyes shining. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." "We'd like to hang it inside," the governor said, "if you'll allow it. A reminder of why this place exists." Kate nodded, unable to speak. That evening, after the supplies were organized and the volunteers had gone home, Kate stood alone in the empty clinic. The drawing hung in a frame near the entrance, illuminated by the glow of the gas lamps. She walked slowly through the exam rooms, the birthing suite, the small library of medical texts Dr. Morrison had donated. Everything was ready. Tomorrow the doors would open, and the work, the real work, would begin. Kate returned to the entrance and stood beneath the sign, looking out at the darkening street. She thought of the woman she'd been 18 months ago, freezing, starving, hopeless, kneeling on a cold floor, picking up broken pieces. She thought of the moment she'd chosen to share her last meal with a child she didn't know. And she realized something. She hadn't lost her future that night. She'd found it. 3 months later, a letter arrived at the clinic. It was from the territorial governor's office, written in formal script. Mrs. Brennan, the Territorial Council has approved the expansion of the health initiative. 4 additional clinics will be constructed across Wyoming Territory. You have been appointed Regional Director of Frontier Medical Services. Dr. Morrison speaks of no one else. The people you serve speak of no one else. Silver Ridge and this territory are better because you chose compassion over comfort. Respectfully, Governor James Caldwell. Kate folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. Then she put on her coat, picked up her medical bag, and headed out the door. There was a baby due in Bennett's camp by morning, and she had a long ride ahead.